Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second part of the symposium devoted to plant conservation on Oceanic Island. My name is Michael Keane. I'm one of the three organizers of this symposium. And for those of you who have been here in the morning, you know that we will start with the last presentation, which was scheduled for this morning, because we will miss two of the presentations of this afternoon. So I welcome Monica Mora to talk about the IUCN Plant Specialist Group for Macaronesia, using transnational cooperation and updated scientific data to better understand and mitigate the threats to oceanic island floras.
Thank you, and hello again. So I'm going to talk about our new plant specialist group and why it is important to have this type of group in Macaronesia. What is the setting in Macaronesia relating plant species? So I believe you know that Macaronesia is, the Macaronesian Islands are part of the Mediterranean basin biodiversity hotspot. Obviously we're not in the Mediterranean, but the outer limits incorporate the Macaronesian Islands. And there have been some questions, I think there still are, about if Macaronesia really exists. Is there a region is there a way to unify all the archipelagos that are part, commonly known as Macaronesia? So there have been some conflicting ideas. I know I have a paleontologist friend who actually does not think there is Macaronesia, but I think that we have a certain number of common aspects that I would call the Macaronesian common denominator. So I'm going to talk about this, and the Macaronesian common denominator, I think, is displayed there. So we have genetic patterns that are particular to islands or to specific islands, and sometimes we have genetic patterns within islands. So, and this is in all the Macaronesian islands. You see that there are actually different genetic patterns going on. So I think that this is a common denominator, and you can have single island endemics or you can have radiations. So I would say that this Macaronesian common denominator is actually evolution in action. You can see evolution in action in the Macaronesian islands. And for instance, in Azores, these examples are from Azorean species. In the morning I talked about tallfish, and this pattern was obtained using microsatellites, nuclear microsatellites, and you can see that there are obviously different genetic patterns going on. There was supposed to be only one endemic species in the Azores Islands, which was tallfish azorica, and we had tallfish succulenta that was shared with the Madeiran archipelago. But what we saw that within the Azores, it's morphological and genetically distinct. So we have these specific patterns. Sometimes these patterns have to do with the geography, the three different sub-archipelagos that are part of the Azores archipelago. We have three different sets of islands, and they are distributed east-west. This other example here has to do with another endemic, which is Lactuca watsoniana, and you can also see all these different nice colors. And I'm going to talk about this later on, but I think it's pretty evident that there are differences within the archipelago. And it's not only, obviously, in the Azores. As I said, these genetic patterns occur in several archipelagos. These examples come from the Canary Islands. And this specific is in Periploca. The specific example is in Periploca. And also in the endemic Ruta, which is a work in progress. And when we look at these pictures taken from in Macaronesia. This is from Azores. And these are some photographs from the Canaries. So basically, this evolution in action that we see in Macaronesia is linked to geography. And when I say geography topology is linked also to geology. For instance, in the Azores, we know that, and I've said this in the morning, that the Azorean Islands are all quite recent. But even if they are recent, they still, the geology or the age of the islands we can see that is linked to some of the genetic patterns that we are seeing, with some of the oldest islands having some specific patterns. For instance, Santa Maria, which was supposed to be much older than is now considered by our colleagues, geologists, but still Santa Maria has specific genetic patterns which may be connected to this age of the island. And ecology. So ecology also is something that is shaping up this evolution in action that we are seeing in Azores and the other Macaronesian archipelagos. This is an example from, again, the Azores Islands. This is Ami, and two Ami species, Ami subertianum, which is a coastal plant, and Ami trifoliatum. Oops, sorry, always keep getting the wrong button. So this is the coastal, and this is the inland species. And when we analyzed these plants using several populations within all the Azorean Islands, using, again, microsatellites specifically developed, we got these nice patterns here. And you can see that we have things that have to do with the island. So this is a pattern for Terceira, for instance. This is a pattern for São Miguel. And this is very interesting because we have plants or population from São Jorge here. And this group also has specimens from São Jorge and from Pico. And what is the difference? It's the place. It's very near, but the thing that it's making these individuals different, they are inside calderas. So you have in the Azores, they're very frequent, you have very small parasitic volcanoes. These volcanoes often have small lakes inside, or they are just quite steep. They have quite steep sides. And we saw that very specific pattern inside the slope of this small parasitic cone, that it's different from the outside. And this is shared not only in the islands of São Jorge, but also in Pico, in the same ecological setting. So the case of Ami is quite interesting. This other group here, it's basically coastal specimens. So in the Canaries, there have been many things published regarding how these evolutionary processes are working, what are the drivers, the driving factors of this evolution in action. And Julie is here, can then in the discussion answer your questions much better than I do. But what we can see is that the importance of having colonizers coming from different origins, and coming in different times, and the effect of island hopping between the different islands of the archipelago, extinction, back colonization within island speciation, and of course ongoing endemization from all these processes acting. So these evolutionary processes actually also make that when we want to make conservation actions or plans of these species, we have sometimes our work made difficult because of the way these evolutionary processes act. And why? Because we can have cryptic lineages, cryptic species or cryptic lineages, we have ongoing hybridization events, and we can have also incomplete lineage sorting, and this is very evident when you have, for instance, a young archipelago like the Azores. And all these issues are also affecting how we describe and what we collect and how we actually even plan our sampling. So actually what we can have as a problem coming out from all this is what we call the Linnaean shortfall, which basically has to do with the fact that, well, most of the species probably are considered not to have been still described yet, or not have been described yet, or they cannot be described yet, or not even being collected yet. So we can have these things already sampled, just waiting for a description, or not even being collected. And this is another thing that is part of the Macaronesian common denominator, which is Linnaean shortfall and or cryptic lineages. And the Asteraceae are very good for this, very good examples. This is 2 Azorian Asteraceae. I will talk about in detail following. But they are very interesting because at first glance they could be the same thing, but now they're 2 different species here. This is a Leontodon and this is a Tolpish. And it's also an interesting case of Pericalish. And in Pericalish, for instance, there was a new species that was recently described. So it's a good illustration of inside Pericalish there were actually species that were not known still, and there was one that was described very recently for Madeira. And this Linnaean shortfall was initially described for Macaronesia for the Azores in this paper here, but it is obvious that it's not something that occurs in the Azores only, but also in other archipelagos. So this is, for instance, in the Azores, this has a lot to do with how it was not so easy to go to certain islands. I'm talking in an historical perspective. So, because sometimes all this comes to such a small aspect. It's not easy, and it has not been historically easy. Now, of course, it's easy, but historically it was not easy to go to some of these islands. And when I read some detailed historical reports of eminent botanists that came to the Azores, they complain, they say, well, we could not find a donkey. We could not find a ride to Flores and Corvo, which are the westernmost islands. So these are very small aspects, but they actually do add to this current Linnaean shortfall. So the case of the Leontodon that I was talking just now. So this is the distribution of the Leontodon. There was supposed to be 2 species in the Azores, but actually when we started to look a bit more carefully and even looking at herbarium specimens, what we saw was that in Flores and Corvo, we saw this form, and we also had access to herbarium specimens that matched this form, this morphotype. Then we had this form in the central group, and this form was in São Miguel. So actually, this is a more than evident case of Linnaean shortfall, and also because this form here was actually already mentioned in a 19th century report of the Azores flora, and then for some reason it was ignored subsequently, and the taxonomic account was wrong. So this is just one of actually several examples that exist in the Azorian flora. Again, the Tolpish, I'm going to talk about this more briefly because I already talked in the morning about the possibility of having a cryptic species in Graciosa. This has to do with the breeding system. This has to do possibly also with morphology, but this is what we want, obviously, to be sure. So we are ongoing. This is very complicated for us for a very simple reason. The populations are very small. They don't produce many flowers. So if you want to make a good morphological study of this plant, it's quite difficult because we cannot go there and just collect everything because otherwise the population would be extinct. And even herbarium specimens are quite rare. But anyway, inside Tolpija zorica, it's, I believe, quite clear that, and this is more easy to study morphologically, it's quite clear that there are morphological different aspects and that match different genetic patterns. And this is what I was talking about in the morning. So we can see Graciosa here. This was also done previously in the other study with microsatellite markers, so it's quite different. But it's interesting that this is another example of what I was saying. Inside San Miguel, you can actually have different patterns also. So in Santa Maria, this pattern is mainly the yellow group, is matched here in San Miguel in just one population. The other two have different genetic pattern. And this is the lactuca that I was showing you a little before. So the interesting thing here is obviously not all of these different nice colors, but inside Pico, you actually have populations that are genetically different. So this is possibly connected to cryptic OTUs, or maybe it's just species, traditional, if you want to call it different species. We are also trying to enlarge our morphological data set to be sure. And this is an example for Madeira. And as you can see, the genetic data set has some strange things here with insertion of different taxa nested within others. So molecularly, this is not very clear, but morphologically it is. And there was even this subspecies of Andriella, this is for Andriella, was described based on morphology. And again, for Madeira and Canaries, this study basically will follow some new descriptions, 2 new species coming from the Madeira, from Madeira Islands in Matiula. And again, we have other possibility of cryptic taxa within the Canaries. And for instance, in this study with Ranunculus cortusifolius, there were actually different genotypes coming from the study for different archipelagos, for the Azores, for Madeira and for the Canaries. This is what was obtained for the Canaries, but also some different distinct genotypes for the other 2 archipelagos. This is a ruta, the patterns obtained for the endemic ruta. This is also something that is being prepared for publication. So there is an east-west genetic split in the Canaries, and this genetic split is quantitative and qualitative and affects a lot of different native plant lineages. And in Cabo Verde, again, we can see that this time there is a northern and southern element, and this was made evident in a molecular study made with the Ecum species, where it was possible to distinguish 3 subspecies that are linked geographically to different islands of the archipelago. And also, again, in the Canary Islands, again, the northern and versus southern element for Globularia amygdalifolia, for Umbilic schmidti, and also this one. This is an ubiquitous element because there are genetic patterns different observed, but they are not seem to be connected geographically to some islands and not others. So this is the Macaronesian common denominator, but this common denominator also includes a lot of conservation issues. So this is what connects all these to our group, the high amount of conservation issues, multiple threats that are existing in these archipelagos. So this was a publication that analyzed exactly these threats in 2010. And this was a previous publication specifically for the Azores in 2009. This one, and this was published for the Cape Verde Islands. So there is a lot of problems, but the fact is that there is a lot of science already published on this. So we have lots of information already available. But the problem is that we need to bridge the gap. We need to get this information in practice, to get this to the people that make the practice, that make really the conservation in the field. And that's where things sometimes get to be difficult, because sometimes the decisions that are made are not the most scientific ones. They are sometimes based only on, well, people that are not well informed about things. And we can get to even anecdotal situations like this one in the Canaries, where people think that controlling goats is something that's a crime that should not be done, or even when the European Union supports projects to breed rabbits and reintroduce them on islands that don't have them anymore, like it was in Porto Santo, Madeira. And these are some unfortunate examples from the Azores, where you can see that this is very common to see. If you go someday to Pico, you will probably see this. And this is supposed to be a protected area. You can see the cows freely roaming and eating whatever they desire at the moment, which can be an endemic, basically. And sometimes this can also be seen. This is dumping garbage and debris from construction in places where actually, although there are invasive plants, there are still also some very nice endemics growing. Invasive plants being freely commerced in the local market, or even this one. This is another case of a civil parish worker that is done in not the most appropriate way, because what you see here cut is Azorina vidali. So this is a very nice population of Azorina vidali that is systematically cut, and the debris is dumped to the coastal rocks on the side. So this is all makes the highly important to have a Macaronesian plant specialist group active, going on, with an active perspective in the Macaronesian Islands. So what are our goals? Assess the most urgent priorities for conservation of the native Macaronesian flora, improve the impact of conservation science and practice for a better preservation of plant biodiversity. So this is one part of our objectives. You can see that, well, the first two ones are what they are supposed to be, which means assessing, making assessments for the IUCN Red List, and sometimes some reassessments that need to be corrected. So basically, these are our top two priorities. I will talk about the other one later. And although for some archipelagos, assessments have been done quite successfully in a large scale, for Cabo Verde, for instance, this was done with using Hammer software. And 78% of the endemic plants from Cabo Verde were considered threatened using Hammer. And for other archipelagos, you have the Azores on the other limit. So you have Cabo Verde that was nicely studied, although some reassessments are required. And on the other side, you have the Azores. You can see these are the number of taxa per family. This is from an earlier checklist in blue, and then this from a revision we are making for a project in 2009, the orange one. And then in green, it's the number of assessed, where you see that there is a lot of things to do yet. So there is, considering the 2019 list, we have about 27% assessed, so we have a lot of things to do in the Azores. These are other of our objectives. Basically, what are the things here that we are willing to do or think that are very important? Population level monitoring and analysis, and we have to deal with invasive species or provide counseling. Some of these things are just providing counseling, others, some of our members can actually directly act. Because this was something that I forgot to say, that we have members that are part of some governmental departments. So we have in all Macaronesia people that are botanic gardens, they are part of environmental departments, and the group is co-hosted between the University of the Azores and the Clavijo Botanical Garden. So we have a co-chair between the Azores and the Canaries. What other things we have that are very important? Well, we have to do or have to counsel in the domain of in situ and ex situ conservation. This is very important for critically endangered and endangered species. And also, our approach, I will talk about this next, but we want to implement an holistic approach to conservation, because I think this is the most correct way to deal with these issues. Okay, just finishing. So, basically, providing consultancy. This is, as I said, one of our main objectives. And the monitoring actions of critical endangered and endangered taxa with the diagnosis of the current threats that are menacing this taxa. Some conservation plans are already in motion for the Canaries, but for the Azores, for instance, this is a very important task that needs to be done. And also the monitoring or counseling on monitoring actions of the alien invasive species is a very big problem in all the archipelagos. I talk about the Azores because I come from there and know exactly how it goes. So it's just a sample, a very small sample of all the different invasives that we can find in the Macaronesian archipelago. And not only monitoring, but obviously eradicating, although some of these plants and animals are almost, I don't know if it's impossible, but virtually impossible to completely eradicate, so probably control. So what I was telling you about this, what we want to do is an holistic conservation. We want to try to implement an holistic conservation perspective. So what this holistic conservation perspective has to do? Well, enrichment of public biological databases, seed and herbarium specimens. We need to, when we do the sampling, we'll need to be sure exactly of what we are sampling. So it's very important to screen and use molecular markers, for instance, to screen to be sure exactly how are the patterns of, you see that this is something that occurs in Macaronesia, so if you want to make a good contribution either to herbarium or to seed banks, we need to know what we are sampling. So it's very important to implement genetic studies so we know that we are sampling and what patterns we are sampling. This is very important. And it's very important because this is also the way to know if we are seeing the lineages that were not described or species that were not described yet, or if we are seeing cryptic species. So we need to be sure exactly what we are trying to preserve, because this is a fundamental thing. Taxonomy needs to be correct. If we want to make a conservation plan, we need to know what exactly we are going to make conservation. What is the taxa? Otherwise, we will have a very anecdotal situation that occurred in the Azores, where the top most threatened species was Marsilia azorica, and after a molecular screening was done, actually, it revealed that Marsilia azorica was Marsilia hirsuta, which is a weed that came from Florida because Terceira, this was a thing that only occurred in Terceira, as a military base, American military base, and it probably came with the Americans from Florida to the Azores. So it's fundamental. And this approach, this holistic approach, not only has to do with taxonomy, phylogenetics, but also, but also obviously with reproductive biology and ecology, of all different aspects of all different disciplines. So we need to have a multidisciplinary evidence supporting conservation plans. And where should we act? We should act in an operative conservation unit that can very well be the population, because it's at population level that evolution works. And we know all this from Darwin. Darwin knew that if there is no difference, if there is no variability in a population, inside a population, there is no evolution. So if we want to preserve biodiversity and evolution patterns, we need to act at this level. And we also need to be very aware that this has to do with something that we discussed in the morning, which is how we do translocations, how we do collecting exactly for seed banks. So we need to preserve the genetic patterns and be sure that in Macaronesia we have islands within islands. So these are these different genetic patterns that need to be accounted for. This is just an example of an holistic approach that was done for the Azorean Veronica Dabney, where all different types of areas of biology were used to produce a report, obviously, a scientific paper, on these very threatened species. Finally, just to finish, I'm sorry, I'm taking too long. Our final aspects have to do with, obviously, with meetings of the group and talking to people like I'm doing now about what we want to do and the state of conservation in Macaronesia, and having outreach programs, development of different outreach programs. And I think that in our current days, the digital tools are extremely important. I want just to mention our Wall App, which is an application for mobile, and also my current project is called Easy Flora. Basically, I want to make a flora of the Azores that does not exist yet, but to make that, I want to make it interesting for all the people and not just a boring flora that only some botanists will take a look at once in a while. So we are developing mobile application that is basically going to do identification of endemic plants using image recognition software, something that has been developed for other locations of the world. Sometimes these things don't work very well, so we are developing one specifically for the Azores, so hopefully it will work good with the Azorean species. And thank you very much. Sorry for taking too long.
Well, many thanks, Monica, for this overview of what is happening at the moment at the Macaronesian Islands and what the IUCN specialist group is doing. We will have to postpone questions to the end in order to keep in time. And I would now like to ask our second speaker, this is Marion Shaw, who is going to talk about the IUCN Seed Conservation Specialist Group, connecting experts, identifying gaps, and developing best practices. She's giving the talk on behalf of Uromi Goodale, who, because of the cancelling of a plane, unfortunately can't attend the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate that Uromi could not be here with us, but she asked me to give the talk on her behalf. So we are the co-chairs of the Seed Conservation Specialist Group, and we also have the representation from the Secretariat. Kate Marfley is here as well with Botanic Gardens Conservation International. So the IUCN Species Survival Commission is a very large group, international group, more than 10,000 volunteer experts, and it's the largest of the different commissions that are found at IUCN. And essentially, I mean, you've heard some from Monica. It enables IUCN to help with worldwide organizations with conserving biodiversity, building knowledge on conservation status of various taxonomic groups, and providing advice and developing policies and things like that. The specialist groups, there are over 140 specialist groups now, or specialist groups, red list authorities, and task forces across the SSC. And they focus, such as the Micronesian Plant Specialist Group, on regional areas or taxonomic groups or sometimes disciplinary groups. So you can visit this website to learn more about the different specialist groups that are found in the SSC. We formed the Seed Conservation Specialist Group because there was a lack of representation for seed conservation within the SSC and the specialist groups. The 2016 World Conservation Congress was in Hawaii, so since I'm based there, I was able to organize a session there to create the specialist group. We brought together 33 different specialists from around the world who were interested in helping to create this seed conservation specialist group. And we were able to sort of workshop our proposal at that session and then establish the group the next year in 2017 with 61 specialists supporting that proposal. So we sort of broadly define seed conservation as preserving or banking seeds of wild species, especially those that are threatened or near threatened under the IUCN Red List categories, primarily for germplasm storage and future reintroduction. And our mission is to promote seed conservation by providing a network for knowledge sharing in different ecosystems around the world, aiding prioritization, capacity building, and development of best practices. So we definitely thank very much the Botanic Gardens Conservation International for providing our hosting organization and secretariat. You can learn more by visiting their website. Catherine O'Donnell helped us to initiate this relationship in creating the Seed Conservation Specialist Group, and currently Kate is covering for Catherine's duties, and you can email her at that address there if you're interested. We, as a new specialist group, we basically had 4 priority targets for the quadrennium since we actually started in 2017. The first target was just to actively recruit new members. Second was to create and maintain an online global seed conservation directory of expertise. And then following that, we want to conduct a gap analysis using the data that we got from the directory of expertise. And then we want to create IUCN guidelines on seed conservation. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those targets. So we have a really broad membership. Some of you are here, but we have members from all across all the different continents, quite a few different countries, people doing actual seed banking or managing different conservation programs, a lot of different types of experts and specialists from around the world. And right now we have 149 members, and we've invited more people, and then you are also invited to become a member if you are interested. So this is how you become a member, but the most important thing really is to contact myself and Uromi if you're interested in becoming a member. Let us know where you're working and what you're interested in, and then we can give you the instructions on how to become a member and a code that you'll need in order to join our group. And the Seed Conservation Directory of Expertise is one of the most exciting deliverables that we've had so far. It contains information on all kinds of different individuals and facilities all around the world, and various different types of organizations focusing on wild species conservation. And it allows for knowledge transfer between different groups and organizations that might otherwise not have been able to connect and network together. The link that you see here shows an instructional video on how to use the Seed Conservation Directory of Expertise. And then this is what that directory looks like. So you can see there's a map that shows each dot is an individual person who has completed a survey online to be included in this Seed Conservation Directory. We have over 450 people included on the directory now, and you can see that they're from all across the world. And then each of those different bars that you see there represent a different type of expertise or facilities that are located, or capacity that's located at the organization where that person has filled out the survey. And it's an interactive tool. You can access it freely online, and then you can click on any number of different categories that you're interested. If you want to find someone in a certain country or who has certain expertise on certain areas, you're able to filter this and then look for the experts who are on this directory. So it's a really great resource. The link is there, but you can also just Google Seed Conservation Directory of Expertise and you'll find it. And yeah, we're really excited to have all of these people included on this directory, but we also invite you, or you can let other people know who might be interested, to join the conservation directory as well. The next step that we're currently working on is to conduct a gap analysis of the expertise around the world. So we want to look at the gaps in species, expertise, as well as regional expertise. So, for example, right now, a lot of the experts are found in developed countries. So we need to figure out where those gaps are and which countries there and which regions there is a lack of seed conservation expertise, or perhaps there are people there that we just haven't been able to reach yet, and try to reach out to those different regions. And then another example is that we have these 147 long-term storage facilities represented, but again, you see a lot of them in the United States and in Europe, so we need to reach out to the other areas to see if any of these facilities or expertise does exist already, and if not, how can we help them to develop that capacity. So that's something we're currently working on. Our next goal for 2020 will be to develop IUCN guidelines for seed conservation. So there are some guidelines such as this for species conservation planning. There is a reintroduction guidelines. There's an ex situ conservation guideline, but a lot of these are very heavily animal focused. If they mention seeds, it's in passing, just in one paragraph. So we want to help complement those guidelines with some seed conservation guidelines that will work along with the existing guidelines, and we want to work with other specialist groups, perhaps the Micronesian specialist group, to create guidelines on how to use seeds in conservation and restoration efforts. And we are also in communication with other groups outside of IUCN that may be developing different types of seed-based documents and best protocols to try to complement each other rather than duplicating any efforts. So we're working on that now. The final outcome of that will be a document that's freely available to all to implement seed conservation into other guidelines. We are working on developing a proposal for the World Conservation Congress next year in 2020, where we will bring together some of the experts who will be working on developing these guidelines, and we'll discuss and sort of workshop those guidelines, hopefully at the World Conservation Congress next year. So if you're interested in that, feel free to contact us. And we are going to have a seed conservation specialist group informational meeting here at the conference. It's an open meeting. Anyone is welcome to join. So that will be on Thursday. at 1 p.m., and then it's in room D6 in a neighboring building. So you are very welcome to join us for that informational meeting. Bring others if you think they might be interested. You'll be able to learn how to become a member and how you might contribute to these guidelines for seed conservation if you're interested in doing that. And then finally, we just want to thank our funders who have helped us, especially the U.S. Forest Service and Botanic Gardens Conservation International, that helped fund the Seed Conservation Directory of Expertise, and then our institutions that have supported our work and specialist group meetings and related activities. And you're welcome to contact myself and Uromi if you're interested in learning more about the specialist group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. There's one.
Hi, thank you for the nice talk. I wonder, are you associating the tests of germination, of viability? Is it part of this group? Also testing the viability of seeds, or it's just, or you are just at the step of conservation, or?
I would say a lot of our members are working on testing viability of seeds and storage, certainly. Our group is more focused on connecting people and analyzing where the gaps are and trying to help develop that capacity. So, somewhat, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions? If that's not the case, many thanks again, Marion. And we come to the final talk of this session. It is Red Lists and Open Data, how the New Caledonia Plant Red List Authority has brought together environment professionals, scientists, and amateur experts. And the presentation is done by Mr. Phillip Baum.
Bonjour, good afternoon. Sorry for my name is Phillip Baum, not Shankar Meyer, but Shankar Meyer apologizes, can't be here today. So it's very a privilege for me, and I'm really proud to present you the Red List authorities that have been created in New Caledonia 6 years ago. Firstly, once upon a time, 4 siblings, really passionate of the nature in New Caledonia, have to create local association just to be able to get a website domain site. And firstly, the association was just in order to be able to create a website. And these 4 siblings share knowledge, but also picture. It was just to promote knowledge sharing of native biodiversity in New Caledonia. And in 2012, botanists gather and make a proposition to create a true Red List authority to be able to access all the flora of New Caledonia following a unique methodology, and we chose to follow the IUCN methodology. It was a very laborious phase to create this group, and during 2 years we worked together to be able to convince research institute to gather data, but also to convince provinces, because in New Caledonia there is 3 provinces, each are independent, more or less independent, and clearly independent to manage environment. And also we have to convince mining, because mining society is very important for economy in New Caledonia, and it was also a challenge for us to be supported by mining company. During these 2 years, we have been trained by George Charles. It's a very important person that helped us to be able to access all the flora in New Caledonia. After these 2 years, we have been in front of a very large challenge because only 40 botanists have to be able to access a unique New Caledonia flora composed of more than 3,400 species and more than 75% of endemics that represent 1% of all the endemic plants in the world. So it was really challenging, and also with taxonomic boundaries not really definitive, because since 2000, one new species is described each month. It was also a challenge to complete this task in the complex social, political, and economic framework. I told just before about the distinction in 3 provinces that was really independent to manage their environment issue and also the flora. But it was here also a complex political and economic framework because of the mining company also and because of a decolonization process. So during 2 years was for us a challenge to gather everybody around the table and to share what we want to do. And finally, the RLR is now recognized as the only authority to be able to evaluate and access all the flora of New Caledonia. And it was really for us the first success of this group, above just to be accredited by IUCN. For us, it was a local challenge that it was really interesting. The first thing we have to do for this very large task was to aggregate all the data coming from more than 40 databases, mainly coming from herbarium or inventory plots, also data coming from inventory or mining company, and to make sure that all the occurrences are accurate in terms of taxonomy and also accurate in terms of geographic. So mostly we have to answer to 4 main questions. The first question is, which is the plants? The second question is where the plants was collected. The third question was who collects these plants, and the fourth question was when this plant was collected. And so the group with many people gathered to evaluate each occurrences to be able to make a filtering on the data itself. The second most important task was also to evaluate the risk and also the traits on the flora, mainly in New Caledonia, corresponding with 3 main traits: mining, of course, fire, like everywhere in the world, and also invader. Mostly in New Caledonia, it's mammals invader. All these traits was evaluated, and we are able to get an assessment of the risk for the flora to be extinct. And this group and this risk was evaluated according to different peoples coming from all scientific institutions, but also with volunteer NGO and many people also coming from mining company to gather together, coming with their own background and skills. So it was really important to have a very different point of view of what we can do on this flora and about the traits. After evaluate, we publish all the data in the IUCN database, of course, but also in the Endemia website, just to be able to make a feedback for local population and also for the provinces in order to be able to have information about the traits for each flora. Of course, the work is still in progress. For the moment, we evaluate 90,000 occurrences, and you see that there is many days that have been necessary to evaluate all the data and also the traits. And more or less 40% of the flora is still evaluated, and 42% of the flora is threatened by mostly by fire mining and the treetop traits that I already introduced. We see that for all the more than 600 trait species, 75% of these species are not included in protected area, and more than 80% of such species are not included also in an ex situ conservation planification. And this group is able now to do some geographic evaluation of where are the conservation, stake of conservation for threatened species, just including CR and EM species. But in New Caledonia, the most important trait is fire. But most important is the combination of such three top traits: fire, mining, invaders. It's absolutely destroy all the flora, because all the species are to be confronted of one of these three traits. Another point very important with authority, it's maybe beyond the authority itself, it's to be able to highlight the gap in the plant knowledge. For example, we estimate now that more than 1,000 species will be state in data deficiency. Data deficiency because we don't know exactly the taxonomic delimitations, and also because we don't get any amount of occurrences to see really the distribution on New Caledonia. It's also because all the covering of occurrences in New Caledonia do not, occurrences do not cover more than 30% of all the land areas. So, of course, we have a small visions of really the importance of the distribution of plants and the traits. We see also that we get some unbalanced information of trait itself, because mining are really precise. We get maps, and we have a support documented of what happened in the mine, and at the other extremity, invader is not really documented, and we don't get any specializations of such traits. So we have to manage with unbalances trait assessment. And of course, we see that conservation are not enough efficient in New Caledonia, and more than 70% of trait species are not protected in situ or even ex situ. But beyond the authority allows us to access the value of the conservation, not only for the policy and not only for all the territory, but we are able now to go back to different scales in geographical. So we are able to make some analysis on just some commune, provinces, a mining company, reserve, and many things, many different parts, many different islands. And also we are able to make assessments just for one taxonomic group, species, genus, or also family. So is this really, even if we don't get any occurrences and any taxa, we are now a way to analyze this with a very efficient way, how the even unbalanced data are distributed, and also where are the threatened species. And the RLA used, the Red List Authority was also used by the local association Endemia to make many feedback for the population, and not just for policy. It was a really good tools to go back on the field and to see different people, local people to discuss with us about the threatened species on just around the city, just in one part of very local assessments. Just on this map, you just see all the events that have been done in the last year around the RLA, the Red List Authority, sorry. And of course, After, with these tools, we are able to go back on the field directly and to talk with people, local population, and also to initiate action of restoration. And we see that this methodology was really efficient for us to gather people around just the question of conservation. And it is why really we recommend everybody to be able to create a local authority, not just to evaluate and access the flora through the IUCN methodology, but mostly to be able to gather people around conservation and to be able to go back to the local population and make many feedback on conservation and progressively to transfer the conservation to local population, mostly than to the Polar Sea. So it was finally very exciting to see how many people that join us and partners that join us in this adventure. And for today, I really want to thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Phillip. That is really an encouraging example of something which looks like a tremendous task, is a tremendous task, but you have achieved a lot. Congratulations for that. Yeah, but for what you've shown here, the network which has been established. Are there any questions? Yes.
So how will you begin to try to fill some of your data deficiency gaps?
This is one part of the problem, of course, because 1,000 species is very important to fill. But firstly, it's a success to be able to make an evaluation, right evaluation of what we know and what we do not know. So now we just get a new grant to be able to evaluate all the species through different herbarium in the world. So it will begin the next year for 2 years. And there's also another grant project really driven by this group that also will try with Bruno this morning tell us about what's happened on mining companies. So we work together, and now we are also another project to work on very threatened species. And of course, this group gather scientific and also amateur, passionate, and everybody. So scientists get some return also to be included in this group. And now we can really see that we get some grants, not directly for the Red List Authority, but for example for scientists to work according to the Red List Authority boundary that reveal us that there is some gap to be filled. And before it was like a patchwork of many ideas. Many people tell us that there is some gap, but we don't have a very clear visions of what we know and what we have to know now. So, of course, this is an ongoing process, and probably we need many, many years. But now, I think it's really important to see that all New Caledonian, and including local population, to scientists, are included into this visions of the flora, the knowledge, and the gap also, and beyond all the local authority, because before you get some list of plants for the northern province, for the southern province, for the Loyalty Islands, but we don't get any visions for all the territory. So now I think it's, of course, we have many works to do, but we progress step by step.
Are there any other questions? If that is not the case, I would like to thank Phillip for the presentation.
Thank you.
And I'll give a big applause. And as we are early in time, we were thinking that we probably will try to have a small round of discussion with the three proposers of that symposium here on the table, and to perhaps think of some outcomes which this symposium might have for the practical work, and where probably the audience might have some interest. And so, Julie and Monica, I would like to ask you to come up here. In the meantime, I might begin with some thoughts. What we've seen throughout the presentations is that we need to work in cooperation and in a regional way, but also in a very practical way. We've seen that a single approach of a certain technique to know more about plants is not sufficient anymore. We've seen that there are different ex situ, in situ conservation approaches which are much more effective if they are joined together. We've seen that regional cooperation helps, like in the case of the Macaronesian region, to identify common problems and find common solutions for conservation. And as we've seen in the last example, it is extremely important not to limit the work to, let's say, the scientists, and also not to limit the work in a way that we go one species by the other, but that we need to know where our gaps are and that we identify the gaps to the extent possible, because as a second step we can tackle them then with a very clear vision. And so these are the few ideas of what have been come out from my point of view of this symposium. And I may hand over the microphone now to Monica.
Well, I think that's basically, you have summed up pretty well what we have been discussing here. Maybe we can have some more contributions from people that did not present.
No, I would totally subscribe what Michael said. We don't share many species among our archipelagos, but we share problems related to conservation of those floras, and we share many processes that are almost equivalent among different archipelagos, oceanic archipelagos of the world. So probably it's a good opportunity here to take advantage of the fact that we don't have the last speaker and so many people here concerned about the conservation of floras to share views and maybe to create a common front of action. Because as I mentioned this morning, I'm really concerned as a scientist. Well, it's good to publish papers in high impact journals and to discover processes or to interpret processes, but I think we all work to see our work materialized, reified into action that is aimed at the best conservation of those processes and species. So I think this is an ideal opportunity to share those views and maybe, as it was mentioned before, to create networks, powerful networks with which to address politicians, especially in order to pay heed to our advice when it comes to science applied to conservation. So I think the word's open for any of you that want to contribute. I didn't bring my computer, but I will take note of your suggestions, and maybe we will assemble a document in the end of the Congress to release these conclusions of these shared thoughts that we can produce here. Anyone? How many of you work in institutions that own or that manage a seed bank? I didn't see ours in the map, but I will talk to Michelle later. Okay, well, seed banks, I don't know how many of you take genetic data into account in order to sample seeds in your seed banks. Okay, because I think that's a major point for seed banks in oceanic islands, given that many of the processes entail these islands within islands and diversification, and these really fast hybridization processes when barriers, ecological or geographic or biological barriers disappear, and many species or many lineages are ready to intermix. So conserving those lineages that are present now in the islands is a crucial step, and for that, as Monica and other speakers highlighted today, it is fundamental to be aware of those genetic processes that are going on and that will keep going on in the future and represent the basis of the endemics of the future, so to speak. So in my view, that would be one highlight, maybe connected to what Michelle was mentioning about guidelines for seed banking produced by IUCN groups, to take into account these genetic processes and the estimates of genetic diversity in order to represent and the diversity in the seed banks. Any thoughts on that idea?
Just one thing along those lines is a lot of us don't actually have the funding to be able to look at each species at a population level, but maybe something that can be taken into consideration for the guidelines is it is something that we do quite regularly. If we think there are populations or even maternal trees of very, very rare species, to maintain collections separately, but then they can be grouped by species. And it's quite an easy way to handle without actually having all the genetic data up front.
Well, I think this will be a part of what is included in the guidelines. There are, as Marin has mentioned, a number of local guidelines already, which now will be merged into the IUCN version, and aspects of genetic diversity or non-diversity and of populations are included. But I was wondering, is anybody of you actually working in conservation projects, active conservation projects? And that is in situ, I would assume. Is that right? Yeah. Have you considered already to use ex situ material in the context of the conservation work? Who did that already? The reason why I ask, there is a slight bias still that people working in situ, working in the field, might even feel that ex situ conservation approaches take away money, take away efforts from the work in situ. And one of the ideas for that workshop is to give best practices for cases where that is not the case, that you need both sides in order to be able to really safeguard genetic entities, populations, as it was said before. And seed banks are depending on the people doing the work in the field. And people in the field might consider that it's worthwhile even collecting seeds if there is not a situation like in Talpis, where if you collect the seeds you won't have plants anymore, to make sure that you have a backup situation and that we can research seedling establishment, which is probably the most crucial point in having the regeneration of plants in the field. And it was interesting to hear that obviously management sometimes can be negative. If we had this big impact of the hurricane on Puerto Rico, opening up gaps, which then allow a rare and endangered plant to come back. I think that in many cases management in situ tries to avoid such kinds of gaps. And we've heard about the old trees which don't manage to get regeneration anymore, and we don't know why. So integration of different approaches of ex situ, in situ conservation from our point of view here is very strongly needed, as well as a cooperation between scientists all over the world at given spots and at given taxa. We were hearing about the problems in not knowing species. I saw the slide with Psychotria without a species name, but a number behind. Those large genera are nightmares for taxonomists, but there are people who are foolish enough to deal with this. They normally these days won't get access to the material anymore. So enabling exchange and collaboration between different countries, different regions is important, and we hear it even within a territoire like New Caledonia. The 3 provinces need to be brought online in order to have a good project going on. I think all these things are quite important, and this conference here might help us to get activities started in that way, like the conference itself and the association, which only was started a few years ago, or that letter to the president of Madagascar, which was mentioned in the plenary. And I would probably propose to put the link on an email information sent out by the organizers, so that really everybody is aware of that. Well, we don't want to keep you here just for being an audience. There's another remark.
I think it's important to pick up on your point about ex situ, in that once we get to a situation where we're down to very small numbers of individuals left, we have a very hard time then getting access to material to learn how to grow something. And so one of the approaches that we're taking in a lot of the overseas territories in the UK is to draw up priority lists. And those priority lists are things that have a natural small distribution, but they may not be threatened now. Trying to secure those in ex situ so that we have access to the material to learn how to grow them, so that if they do get to the point that they are threatened in the wild, we already have material to access, and hopefully we've already learned how to grow them. Because there are so many examples of things getting to the point that they're on the edge of extinction or extinct in the wild, and there's so little genetic diversity left to try to rescue them with, and a lot of resource goes into that, that if we look and start planning further in advance, I think we can maximize our resource use by using ex situ.
Just thanks for your comment, because we're involved in many projects in the Canary Islands, especially in Gran Canaria, which is the island where our botanic garden is, and we're lately especially concerned about sampling those widespread or theoretical widespread groups that we have in the islands, because, well, first because they are part of those lineages that contain, well, cryptic species or cryptic whatever, and that probably in the future, if they get lucky, will give rise to the endemics of the future. But also because in Gran Canaria especially, we have lots of fires regularly that affect, well, areas where these widespread lineages occur. And then if the soil seed bank doesn't properly work because of rains or because there's no soil seed bank, then we have to resort to those seeds in the ex situ facilities in order to reinforce or to reintroduce those populations. Because until now in the islands there was the bad habit, in my opinion, as a geneticist, to bring plants from other islands into translocate from island to island. And well, we have known recently that thanks to genetic data that is terribly wrong, because it's not coherent with the processes, the evolutionary processes that plants themselves undergo in the islands. So in an effort to avoid that kind of dynamics in the reinforcement projects in the field, we're trying to cover as many widespread lineages as possible, although we are limited by our budgetary possibilities, of course, as always. And also I would like to comment on the importance of botanic gardens as tools of conservation. We have a very nice case in the Vieira y Clavijo. Probably in Kew Gardens they will have thousands of them, but we have this Pritchardia monroy palm, which is extremely endangered. I think it's an exclusive endemic of Oahu Island, just 1 or 2 individuals in the wild that don't produce seeds, but we have at least 10 individuals in our botanic garden that are producing seeds regularly. And I think 2 years ago we sent some seeds to Oahu for, I don't know if they were for a seed bank or for reforestation in the wild populations of that palm. But that's a clear illustration of how sharing samples can help preserve that genetic diversity that at some point can bring back new life to populations in extreme danger of extinction. No? Anyone wants to add?
It's very good to hear that, because you have a similar project in Kew Gardens that I participate, that is collecting seeds from our wild collected material. And many of those plants we have now in the gardens, we don't have many specimens, so the genetic diversity is not great. But we do have plants from areas that don't have any more wild populations. So even though you're capturing a tiny bit of genetic diversity, we have been trying to collect seeds from those collections and bank them in the Millennium Seed Bank, and that maybe in the future can be used in studies or in reintroduction and other management tools.
I would like, if no one has anything else to add, I would like to bring up the problem of invasives, alien invasives to islands, especially for us when it comes to that reification of scientific results into conservation projects in situ. In the Canaries, we're finding very strong difficulties with, eradicating especially grazers from natural spaces, especially because, politicians, my direct boss is the Minister of Environment of the Cabildo, local government of the island of Gran Canaria, not the Minister of the central government in Spain. But whereas he's very supportive of science and of the fact that our institution has several lines of research and we use them for publishing papers, for getting funds to develop even more research, he is very reluctant, or he has been until recently. He's no longer minister. He has been very reluctant to apply drastic measures for the eradication of these grazers from natural spaces, and in fact they are playing havoc with most natural populations of very endangered endemics that were already very endangered, and now they are extremely endangered. So I don't know the point I want to reach, but in fact I think it would be important to use all the science and all the cooperative work that we share here to somehow address politicians and make them accomplish the scientific results that we suggest through our efforts, because all of us work for improving the world from our side of science, no? And then it is really very depressing to see that the plants that you try to understand and conserve, then when it comes to taking decisions, operative decisions to preserve those evolutionary projects in protected natural spaces, which is where they should be living like freely and according to the evolutionary processes, then there are social or political issues that prevent us from applying those elementary conservation actions. And I think that is linked also to education, to the fact that, well, largely society ignores our high degree of dependence of biodiversity. And in the Canaries, for instance, we have examples of people thinking that goats were in the islands before men, before humans, or that goats were there even before vegetation. So that when you explain to people that this is not so, and that the endemics are in fact suffering a lot and in danger of extinction because of those animals, then my experience is that people understand and then understand the measures that have to be taken to prevent those plants from going extinct. I don't know if anyone in the audience from any island has experience in these political, social aspects of plant conservation that affect so much conservation science, and ideas about how to guide politicians into the accomplishment of the strategies that science suggests.
I can. Sorry. We have some small experience in New Caledonia, as I try to see on my presentation, and clearly to discuss with policy is really not complicated, but we don't have a very, for me, a very practice or objective actions. It's really, it's like tricky to discuss with policy, to be able to convince policy that it's really important to protect all the flora. But when we go back to the local population and just to discuss with people about their mountain, their valleys, their river, and mostly things, natural things that belongs to local population, it's clearly more evidence that there is actions and that people want to be able to restore not all the territory of New Caledonia, for example, but just the valley where people live. So for my own experience, it's clearly more easy to speak with local population about the very important issue of biodiversity, because there is some concrete issue like the problem with the river, flow of the river, everything. This could be linked immediately with living peoples, and it's not the same with policy. And with policy, we spoke mostly about to reach the target of Hachi, or to be able to have a good management of conservation for just for policy. I don't know if it's difficult for me to explain exactly, but really with local populations, it's the discussion is more direct. It's more linked to concrete things and concrete resolutions that we can just realize with by make more better conservation of landscape, all the landscape, not only the flora. So I think for policy, it's mostly for policy, not for living.
Well, you are aware we will have the morning of tomorrow with a plenary and one symposium especially devoted to the problems caused by non-native alien invasives. And amongst others, there will be the new IUCN guidelines presented, which will try to provide processes and ways to address different target groups from the local population level to the policy level to get through with a message we all think are important. So, if there are no other urgent or interested questions, I would like to thank the presenters once more on behalf of the organizers of the symposium. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for having provided the platform for this symposium. And I would like to thank you for your patience, for your interest, and wish you a nice evening and a very good conference. Thank you very much.